Jim Rogers is a renowned international investor and best-selling author. In 1973, he co-founded the Quantum Fund with George Soros. After a fantastically successful decade, he retired to travel the world. He also runs the Rogers Global Resources Equity Index. Recently, Rogers sat down with Edward Lehman of AmCham Princeton Foundation to talk about the upcoming crash, why the global economy is moving to Asia, and where he's putting his money in these extraordinary times of the war and the pandemic.
A pleasure to be together with you, and greetings from Beijing to Singapore. Now your family lived in Baltimore, Maryland, where you were born, and then you moved to Marengo County to Demopolis, Alabama. Just out of curiosity, I mean, where did this all come from? I mean, who is James Beeland Rogers Sr.? I know you're junior. And what did he do for a living, and how did that influence you in kind of your life going forward?
Well, my father was in the military during the Second World War. He happened to be stationed in Baltimore when I happened to come out. My mother was a good military wife, and there she was. We were there 3 weeks. I couldn't tell you the hospital. I couldn't tell you anything about Baltimore, except that my father was a military officer stationed near Baltimore when I was born that day. His family had been in Alabama since the beginning, in fact, beginning of Alabama. And so he went back to Alabama after the Second World War, and that's where I grew up.
Right,
and Baltimore just happened to be a bypass, a way stop.
Gotcha. Now your second child, her name is Beeland, and I've heard her referred to as Baby B. That's a family name, right? Or does it have to do with the Tom Bigby River near your hometown at Demopolis, or anything?
Well, in East Alabama, there was a family named Beeland. There were lots of them at various times in history. They were extremely successful. Other times they weren't so successful. So my family name, my grandmother's name, her surname was Beeland. And so my father was James Beeland Rogers, and I was J. And he, by the way, moved to Demopolis, Alabama, Marengo County, as you point out, to work with his brother. They had a manufacturing plant there, and he eventually ran a board and chemical company plant there in Demopolis, Alabama, which is where I grew up. It's a very small town. I mean, Ed, my phone number was 5 where I grew up, so there weren't a whole lot of people hanging around in that part of Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, did you attend the local public schools there? I mean, how did that work? Were there private schools?
No, there were no private schools then. I went to Demopolis High School. There were 40 people in my graduating class. Needless to say, I was first in the class, but that's because most of them couldn't read and write. So it was fairly easy for me to be first in the class. I don't say that with any bragging. It was just pretty simple place.
I mean, in that idea of instilling being a good student, was that just inside of you, Jim? Because I mean, that's the reason why I'm asking about your background is I want folks to know, I mean, people who come from small towns, whether they be in the United States or elsewhere, there's a lot of folks that come from these places. And is that nature or nurture? I mean, were your folks pushing you and making you read early and that type of thing?
Well, it's a good question. My grandparents certainly were educated. My grandfather was a lawyer. My mother's mother was a reporter, female reporter, which was unusual in those days. And my parents were certainly educated and smart people. I guess, I don't know, my brothers are smart kids. They all went to fancy universities. I guess if I had to figure it all out, I guess it's probably my mother or my grandmother. Boys get their brains from their mothers, it turns out. That's what the geneticists are pointing out. But I have no idea. All of us, or my brothers and I, were good students in the school. But as I said, I'm not sure how much that says. I'm sure if we'd been at Eton or someplace, I doubt if we would have even stood at all in the class. But in Demopolis High School, we were good students.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, would you say that the catalyst too, I mean, you'd sit down at dinner time, you guys all ate at the same time, probably like I did when I was growing up. We as a family would sit down and then we would talk about things. I mean, that's sort of gone away. I mean, do you think that that was a catalyst? You had smart siblings, an unusual mother that was in an industry. But was that a motivation? And do you see that as a problem now with young folks not having dinners with their families, watching TV, hanging on their cell phones or whatever?
Well, I try to have dinner. Well, one of my kids is off at college now. We try to have dinner with the other one every time we can. And I have started. She's 14, but I started trying to talk about things, whereas before it wasn't so common, to see if that's going to help her and motivate her. I mean, she, like her sister, they're both extremely good students. So I don't know if she needs my motivation, but we will see. You can ask me in 30 years. You know, yeah. I brought them to Asia because, in my view, that in their lifetime, Asia is going to be extremely, extremely important. So I want them to know Asia, and I want them to speak Mandarin. That's why we're here. But who knows? Who knows? At least if they work in Chinese restaurants, at least they'll be the maitre d'. They won't be the dishwasher. So we'll see.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the other thing, just. And I know you worked as a very young man. You tell the story about how you started selling peanuts and Coca-Cola at baseball games at the age of 5, and back in 1947. Then later, that was kind of your first investment. You took that money with your dad, right? I mean, I heard this story. And was it typical at that time for kids to have those kind of jobs? And was that something, that was always sort of inside you, Jim, which was to take money and then to invest it in something else and play the long game?
Well, who knows whether it came from my parents or from me. I can't imagine that a 5-year-old kid sort of did it. Maybe I did. I don't remember now. I do know that I certainly have been working all my life, even certainly when I was a teenager. And as you point out, I had my own business before I was 6. I had my own business. So yes, but again, that's a very small town. I don't want it to sound like a Yankee Stadium or something. It was a small place and a small business. But for whatever reason, I always remember working and sometimes having 2 or 3 jobs. When I was a teenager, I had 2 or 3 jobs while I was in school, and was always trying to earn some money. Partly because I didn't have any money.
Yeah, no, and you instilled that with your kids as well, right? I mean, your daughter, Happy, I guess, was teaching Mandarin. I mean, she's that good. I mean, congratulations for that, as opposed to selling peanuts or Coca-Cola.
Well, Ed, I told her when she was 14, she had to get a job because I know the importance of work, especially as a teenager. And I thought she would go to McDonald's and get a job making $8 an hour. She got a job teaching Mandarin, making $30 an hour. And she complained because the grown-up teachers are making $60 an hour. She thought she should be making more. I said, listen, you're 14, be glad you're getting anything.
No, it's terrific that, because I think even in the United States now, and one of the reasons, I mean, you've gone to Singapore, is I'm not even sure that they would allow that kind of thing to happen in the United States, where someone at 14 would be able to do it. It was common even in my day, I mean, to have these summer jobs, and summer jobs could actually kind of defray the cost of I went to some private schools and defray that cost. But now that's an impossibility. But the lessons that I think are learned, and I would imagine from yours, were invaluable, doing stuff yourself and self-reliance, right?
And I'm sure that if I had had that job when I was 5 or 6 or 7, working at the baseball games, I would have been arrested, and my parents would have been arrested if this were 2022. You cannot imagine that anybody could get away with that these days. But at that time, in a small town in the backwoods, nobody cared. Nobody paid any attention.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about Yale. So you went there as an undergraduate. Which college did you live at Yale? I know that's divided into different colleges. And did any of that college stuff impact your thought process when you were there?
my college was Davenport College, which I liked a great deal and had a lot of fun. No, I had a lot of fun at Yale. I was in over my head. I didn't know what I was doing when I applied to Yale. I certainly had no clue when I got there. But the problem was that I couldn't go home and say this is too much for me because I had bragged to everybody and said I'm going to Yale. Well, I couldn't turn around 6 months later and say, couldn't make it, couldn't do it. So I was scared to death and worked all the time to survive. And somehow or another, I survived. Well, my friends are dying now, but I still have friends from Yale and have fond memories of Yale University.
Yeah, I mean, you studied history. Like, what kind of history did you sort of focus on, or was that not the way?
Well, it was American and European history. I mean, you have to remember, Ed, when I went to Yale, I didn't know anything. I barely knew where Yale was or what Yale was. But when I got there, I realized that I was keen on history after a year or two, and so I majored in history, and it was American and European history. If I'd been smart, I would have studied Asian history, but it just shows how little I knew back in 1962.
Yeah, tell me the value you think of a liberal arts education. I mean, I'm a victim or a beneficiary of a liberal arts education myself. And I mean, when I was getting out of school, I kind of thought, gee, I really don't know how to do anything, so I need to go to graduate school, which is what I did. But tell me what you think is the value of a liberal arts education. And is your daughter, I know she's at university now at Columbia, is she pursuing that same avenue?
Well, she's just entering her sophomore year, and as you know, she won't decide until the end of her sophomore year. If I were guessing, I would say she would major in political science. She seems to be fascinated by the whole political scene, but we will see. If you ask me, when I speak at universities or anywhere, they always say, what should we study? And I say, you should study history and philosophy. And they say, no, we want to be rich. We want to be like you. I say, if you want to be rich, you should study history and philosophy. History will teach you about the world, first of all, and second, that it is always changing. And if you can figure out how it's changing, you will get very, very successful. And philosophy will teach you to think. I mean, I was not very good at philosophy when I was at university. Eventually, a few years later, I said, oh, now I understand. Now I understand what they were talking about. But that's what I suggest to people. But my main suggestion to these universities and places is figure out what you love and study it. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your friends. Just figure out what you love. And whatever you love, that's what you should study.
Yeah. And so, I mean, were there teachers or lecturers that were igniting something in you? I mean, I always hear this story that there were some people that were, believed in you along the way. I mean, I didn't necessarily believe that. Maybe I was just such a lackluster student or something. But I mean, was there somebody at Yale that sticks out with you that was really amazing, or not exactly?
Well, I did have some professors that I remember, but in the sense that you're talking about, I don't remember anybody that I would worship at the feet of Professor X. No, there were professors that I liked and classes that I liked, but no, I have heard of people who swear by old professor or whatever, but I don't have a name like that comes to mind. Certainly, I went to Oxford after I went to Yale, and certainly at Oxford because the relationship of students and professors is much closer, there were professors that I was closer to, but that's just the nature of the system more than anything else. I guess I wasn't smart enough to really find one that I worshipped.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that, because I think I'm one of the only few people who say, well, no, I wasn't ignited by anybody in particular. I mean, maybe in law school, I found some people that I admired, but yeah, and let's talk a little bit about Oxford, because that's really interesting. So you got an undergraduate degree at Yale, then you decided a couple of years later that you were going to go to Oxford and get another undergraduate degree in PPE, and that's not PPE with the pandemic. That's philosophy, politics, and economics. And then you went to, what is it, Balliol College, which is an amazing place. I mean, it was founded in 1263. Alums like Boris Johnson and Harold Macmillan and Edward Heath and, all these kind of luminaries went there, including yourself, of course. But what did you reckon was the difference? I mean, I did spend some time at a UK university myself, and it was completely different experience for me from the American system. It was sort of seemed much more independent. Tell me what you thought about those approaches and different
Well,
types of.
I told you I was in over my head when I went to Yale. I was really in over my head when I went to Oxford too. But once again, I had no clue. So I had to scramble. I did scramble. I mean, I survived, but it was Balliol in those days was the #1 college to get into. I don't know how I got in. Looking back on it, I'm still very surprised how I got in, but I did somehow, and somehow or another I survived. Got a reasonably good degree to my surprise, and my professors were surprised too, and again. I look back on my days at university at both Yale and at Oxford, and I had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time. I was in over my head, both places. I was always scrambling to try to keep up with what was going on, but somehow or another I did. I guess it's because I was so scared. I didn't have any choice.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a motivator for sure. I mean, the other thing is I wanted to hear a little bit about you were a coxswain in the Blues. I mean, I don't know anything about rowing but I mean, the coxswain is the person who's in charge of the ship's boat, crew, and rowing, I guess, if I'm a guy from the Midwest, so what do I know? But and at your college team at Oxford, I mean, what kind of influence did that have on you? I know that getting on that team was kind of a controversial thing, which you overcame, and then being a part of that team. Did any of that come into who Jim Rogers is today? Did you learn some lesson there with that position?
Well, I'm sure many people will tell you that sports and activities like that have an influence on you. You remember Wellington, Duke of Wellington, he said to people, the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. In other words, the sports at Eton taught these guys whatever that they needed, whether it's teamwork or leadership or whatever. And that's how he defeated Napoleon. I have no idea. I was not at Waterloo, but Wellington always said that. And many people will tell you that athletic sports, organized sports, are good for people. I have no idea what influence it had on me, except it was great. I loved every minute of it. It's the first time I became a national hero, because that boat race between Oxford and Cambridge is a huge, huge thing, not just in Britain, but in the British Empire, British Commonwealth, and many places. And that was my aspiration. I never told anybody that that's why I wanted to go to Oxford. I figured, well, I'll go to Oxford and I'll be the cox. Well, when I got there, I found out, oh my gosh, hundreds of kids who want to be in the boat race. I didn't think I'd have too much competition. Lo and behold, there were lots of kids who wanted to be in the boat race. But somehow or another, I pulled it off, and it was successful, and it was a lot of fun for me. And what it taught me, who knows? I mean, I could give you the words like teamwork and etc. Perseverance. Maybe perseverance is one of the things that boat race taught me, and I try to teach my kids perseverance, perseverance, perseverance.
You think they'll participate in rowing, or did you try to pass on any of those ideas about participating in those types of things, or not really?
Well, I have learned with my kids and with life that you need to push them where they want to go. They know, even when they're 3 or 4, they know what interests them and what doesn't. And I now know that whatever it is, if they want to play football, you should let them go play football. If they want to dance, let them dance. Push them in that direction. I did not know that when I first became a father, but I do know it now. I have seen, because I look back and I can see that their instincts were to go in the direction that they should have gone in. And I now know that parents should encourage and push towards the ways they want to go. Not where the parents want them to go, but where the kids want to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's very good advice. Only because I think that the world today, I mean, it's a quandary with the parents on how to, it's very different from when you were a child and I was a child, and it's a different in teenagers, and the challenges are different for sure. So yeah, interesting to hear your perspective. I mean, and again, I know you have very talented daughters. They've won some contests in Mandarin in I guess Singapore, and I've heard them on CGTN, and so they've done a fantastic job. So that's something.
Well, thank you, Ed, but I had nothing to do with it. These kids, I don't know how they turned out to be such good Mandarin speakers, but somehow or another, these two little girls have become absolutely flawless Mandarin speakers. And it's not because of me. I speak no Mandarin. They did it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you've been out there for 15 years. I mean, did you not, or your wife, did you guys not take up Mandarin as well, or just wasn't part of the idea?
Well, as you know very well, and certainly all of you in China know, Mandarin is a tonal language. You have to hear the tones. Well, I'm tone deaf, so I'm useless. My children say, "Please, Daddy, do not speak Mandarin," because I just don't hear it. My wife is musical, and therefore she hears the tones, and she has picked up a bit of Mandarin over the years. But if you're musical, if you are tonal, you hear the tones, you're probably going to be good at Mandarin. If you're tone deaf like me, oh my gosh, you're an embarrassment. I'm an embarrassment.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's difficult, I think, for America. And again, it seems psychologically a big distance for Americans to make that jump into Chinese. And so I certainly, when I was growing up, that was the case. And now that's completely different with all the opportunities that young people have today. I mean, obviously being in Singapore was a great place to be. When you were in the service, you were there for 2 years. Were you drafted, and what, anything to learn from being in the military service? It was during the
Well, I was about to be drafted, so
okay.
I went down and signed up for the military so I could have more choices. What did I learn? Well, I can remember once when I was at officers school, all the guys were standing around saying, "Oh, someday we're going to look back and say these were the best years of our lives." And I said, "Not me. I'm going to look back and say this was a hopeless waste of time. What a waste of my time and their money." No, of course, I learned about the military. I learned how it worked, etc. I'm extremely anti-war, no matter what the circumstances, not no matter what, but almost no matter what the circumstances. So but I don't think being in the Army taught me that. I did realize that a lot of it was a waste, but we've had wars for thousands of years, and I'm afraid we're always going to have wars. Human beings are always going to have wars. It's absurd. But that's the way many human beings are, whether we like it or not.
What was your rank? Just out of curiosity, and where were you stationed?
I went to officer school and became a lieutenant at Fort Lee, Virginia.
Okay.
I will tell you a story. I don't know how much time we have. One weekend, I mean, I was very much against the war. And one weekend, there was a big, huge demonstration, hundreds of thousands of people at the Pentagon, to raise the Pentagon and float it away. Well, I went to that demonstration. Monday morning, I'm in class, and in comes the sergeant and says, "Who's Lieutenant Rogers?" I said, "Here I am." He said, "Report to the commanding general tomorrow at 10 o'clock in your dress uniform." I said, "Oh my God." I knew they had found out that I had been at the demonstration, that I was going. In those days, during the Vietnamese War, everybody was very, very strict, and they put officers, especially, who were against the war, they put them in jail many times. So I figured I'm going to jail. So I show up at the general's office, TV's there, other officers are there. I said, "Oh my God, this is the end. This is the end." And I said to the colonel, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, you'll find out." Anyway, to make a very long story short, very quickly, because to me it's a funny story. The comes in and says, Lieutenant Rogers, I want to give you this gold watch because you're the #1 graduate ever from officer school at this fort. I said, what did you say? What did you say? I know he was going to say, we're sending you to jail. And all of a sudden, he started talking about this gold watch and an award. Oh, my gosh. Anyway, I didn't particularly like the military, but I adapted like I had to and survived.
Yeah, I mean, those were, especially 1968. I mean, that was, it's hard to believe. And I think for young people, I was very young, but the times are difficult now in the United States, but I would say 1968 was extremely difficult. I mean, you remember it better than I do. And that's a remarkable story that these kind of contradictory things were happening, the protesting and then accelerating. But it's interesting because I was too young for the draft or the potential draft. And I just wondered what you might have learned from that. So then now with Wall Street, like I said, you studied history, you studied at Yale and then PPE at Oxford, then you get this job on Wall Street, and it doesn't quite fit into the picture. I mean, had you made stock purchases, related purchases before you got involved in Wall Street, or was it just out of the blue that you decided to wind up there?
And I was going to, when I was at Yale, I was going to go to law school and medical school and business school. I was a confused young man, like many people. But then I had a summer job on Wall Street, only because one day I went down to the placement office to do interviews to see what it was like. I liked the guy. He liked me. He was on Wall Street. I knew nothing about Wall Street. I knew it was in New York. I knew something bad had happened in 1929. I didn't know there was a difference in stocks and bonds. I thought they're all the same thing. But I got there and I loved it because and I didn't know this about myself when I was 21 years old. All my life, I loved keeping up with what was going on in the world. And here was a place that would pay me to do that and try to figure out what would happen next. I couldn't believe it. So I didn't go to law school or medical school or business school. I went to Wall Street as soon as I got out of the Army and loved it. I would have worked for free. I would have worked. I couldn't work for free, obviously, but it was so much fun. It was just, and I tell students all the time, if you find out what your passion is, that's what you should pursue, because that's where you will be successful. Happy people are usually successful people. And if you're not successful, you don't care. You're happy. What do you care if you're not successful?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I like that statement that you would have worked for free. I mean, and I've been in situations, and maybe that's a generational thing as well. I mean, you don't hear that as much now. And what was it? Was it just this, that you were given this opportunity and you just found you were like a fish to water with it, and just enjoyed it so much that you were doing something that was, paying off dividends, or at least challenging you intellectually? So, I mean,
well, it was a three-dimensional puzzle. Every day you go in and there's a time, space, etc. But they're always moving the pieces. No matter what you think, next week the pieces have all changed. And so you have to adapt and you have to anticipate all of that. It's a gigantic puzzle, and that for a very big challenge, but also fascinating and exciting. For me, it was exciting and fascinating. Listen, don't think there weren't bad times and mistakes. There were plenty, but it was a constant challenge. A challenge, not just, it was a constant fascination, is a better way to put it. I mean, I wish the market had been open 7 days a week. It was so much fun for me. Don't think it wasn't hard. Don't think it wasn't difficult. Don't think I didn't have bad time. But it was a wonderful, wonderful way to survive, if you ask me. I loved it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good question, which, I mean, a thought in my mind is that, what did you learn from the tough times? I mean, everyone talks about, in 1970, you started co-managing a fund with George Soros. Over the next 10 years, the quantum fund goes up, 4,200% or so. The S&P goes up only 47%. But there were tough times, and I've read this, Jim, and I don't know if this is true, but I mean, when you graduated from Yale, or at some point, someone had said that you were going to be the most likely to go bankrupt in your class. I don't know if that was facetious or if it's true or misreporting or gossip or fake news of some sort. But tell me about the tough times. I mean, I understand the good times and the accolades, but how'd you get through those tough times?
Well, first of all, that was a facetious statement.
Okay.
One of my reunions or something we were talking about. I said, well, no, I was the one it was supposedly trying to be funny.
Right.
Well, there were tough times. At one time early in my career, I made an investment that tripled my money in like 6 months when everybody around me was going bankrupt. I mean, literally, firms were going bankrupt that had been around forever. And I said to myself, I am so smart. This is so easy. I'm going to be the next Bernard Baruch. Well, needless to say, 6 months later, I lost everything. I lost everything. And partly because I learned how much I did not know, how little I knew about markets and people's emotions and how emotional markets could be. Taught me a lot, fortunately. But no, there were mistakes that I remember once in 1980, I sold oil short, selling shorts when you think things are going to go down. And I did it on a Friday, and that weekend, Iran and Iraq went to war. Needless to say, the price of oil went through the roof. Now, you could say, oh, that's bad luck. No, there's no such thing as bad luck in the markets. Somebody knew that war was happening. You don't start a war one day, just wake up and say, let's have a war. You have to move troops, et cetera, et cetera. So somebody knew. I just hadn't done enough work to know. So, no, there were plenty of times that I made mistakes.
And then, but you had the intestinal fortitude, I guess, to stay with it. I mean, and so I think that's where the lesson is. It was one thing to win, and the quantum fund going up, like I said, 4,200% or thereabouts. But
well, the first time I lost everything, I guess I could have become a priest or a philosopher or committed suicide, or who knows what the options were. I didn't do any of those. All I knew to do was just persevere and keep going and keep trying. Try to save some money and start over. That's all I knew to do, and that's what I did.
And that's what you did in conjunction with was that with the quantum fund and the Soros fund at that point, or was that pre that time where there were those?
No, that was at the same time. Okay. I was talking about my own personal account. The fund we always did better. Sometimes I would do different things with my own money, and the fund was usually smarter than I was.
Right. I mean, and certainly, I mean, by all accounts, I mean, you're a partner in that. I mean, and I guess this is another lesson maybe to be learned or not, but you were at the right place at the right time, right? The reason you were co-managing that fund was because the laws had changed, that your partner needed more folks to be able to go forward with the operation, right? And so was there a lesson to be learned there? Be at the right place at the right time, show up? I mean, what do you reckon?
Well, if you're at the right place at the right time, certainly show up. That's half the battle. To show up at the right place and do what you're supposed to do. I guess that's it. I fumbled around a bit. Soros fumbled around a bit, trying to find people to work with him, and somehow or another, it worked. It worked. I mean, now I hasten to tell you that I have not seen or spoken to Soros in 43 years. Sure. So I have no idea about Soros at all, literally since 1980. So right. You might as well ask me about my first wife. I have no idea what's going on with him or he with me, and don't really care. But at the time, anyway, it was we worked well together.
No, but what I have seen, and I appreciate those comments, but I did see that he said some very positive things about you, that you did the work of eight people, that you'd be working around the clock, and that the idea that why there was even any separation was that you wanted to kind of do it on your own. And you wanted to get more people to be doing that. So I mean, obviously you were a superstar in his eyes, and obviously did very well. So I realized you hadn't spoken to him. But the one thing he also said is that you were an investor like he was an investor, and kind of had the same style, whatever the heck that means. And these are all complementary. And the idea was not to find out about that, was just to see what made, Jim Rogers kind of tick and go, and what other folks had said to him. But I mean, let's switch gears. We'll go over to the travels. So 37 years old, you decide to retire, quote unquote, retire. And then, I mean, had you always envisioned doing this idea of biking around the world? And when you were younger, Yale, Oxford, did you always, or back in Demopolis, I mean, did you have a motorcycle? Were you one of those gear-headed people and wanted that to happen? Or was it mostly to see the world?
Well, I look back on my life, and there were lots of things I would say that I actually meant. I didn't know that I meant. I used to say, I want to see the world. I want to go around the world on a motorcycle. Who knew that I actually meant it, that it wasn't just teenage babble or something? But then that's why I quit. I actually quit earlier when I was a year or two before. But then we had a really good period when everybody else was doing badly. So I stayed on. But finally, since I had already tasted leaving and fulfilling this other dream to see the world, I finally left when I was in 1980 and set out. My goal was to then see the world on a motorcycle. I mean, it sounds absurd. It probably is. But if you know anything about motorcycles, you know they are exhilarating. And it's a good way to see the world because you're right there in it. It's not like being in a car or a truck or something. On a motorcycle. You experience everything, whether you like it or not. So that's what I wanted to do. But if you remember those days, there was Red China, Soviet Union, Cold War. I mean, it was absurd to even dream about something like that. But I kept working at it and working at it and working at it. And finally, I got the necessary permission from the Russians, the Soviets, and the Chinese. And off I went.
And I mean, so there was a lot of plan. I mean, you can't just do like you do now. I mean, there was such a great deal of planning. So this took years in development, right? I assume.
Well, not planning. You couldn't just show up in China and drive across China. You forget the planning. The planning wouldn't have done you any good. You had to have the permission to do
Right.
that. And likewise, the Soviet Union, the idea that some American on a motorcycle, capitalist, was just going to show up and drive across the Soviet Union was ludicrous. But finally, because I kept knocking on doors, finally I got the permission and finally I did it. All I needed was permission. The planning, I had to do it all on the road, needless to say, because there's but you couldn't sort of call ahead and say, do you have a room for tonight? There was no hotel often, so there's no place to call to. At first, there were no phones. So
Right.
no, it was not planning. It was just getting the necessary permission so that I didn't get arrested or shot.
And I mean, and you obviously managed to successfully do that and get, what is it, 3 Guinness Book of World Records. Congratulations on that. Certainly that's no small accomplishment. What did you learn about yourself on that trip? I mean, you were accompanied by somebody on the times you went on the trips, right? The motorcycle trip, and then also on the automobile trip. I mean, what did you learn, and also being in close quarters with another person during that whole time? Was there something to learn there?
Well, I guess again, perseverance. Many times I should have, and probably certainly could have given up, but no, my goal, my dream was to go around the world on the motorcycle. I wanted to see everything. That was my plan. When you grow up in Demopolis, Alabama, where your phone number is 5, Ed, you either never leave or you want to see the world. You want to see everything. Well, I had this nut vision that I wanted to see it all. And so I kept going no matter how bad things got. And once I was held hostage for 8 days in the Congo. I mean, there were many setbacks along the way, but my goal was to do it. And so somehow or another, again, perseverance.
Was the trip later a catalyst for the Rogers International Commodity Index that was started in 2007, or were you investing along as you were going, or did you wait till you got back?
Well, as far as commodities were concerned, at the end of the 90s, I thought I realized that we were about to have the bear market in commodities, a bear market in commodities was ending, and they were going to have a bull market. So I wanted to invest in commodities, but couldn't because I was about to go around the world. And no way you could invest in anything, much less commodities, if you're driving around the world. So I figured if I could figure out an index, because index investing, you could just put it in and not have to be too active. There was no index for commodities, no decent index anyway. So I had to start an index so that I could invest my own money in commodities while I was gone. And that's how the Rogers Commodity Index started. I needed a place for my own money if I wanted to invest in commodities, which I did at the end of the 90s. And that's how it evolved. And so far, so good.
You know, Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem, The English Flag, and in it is paraphrased. What can anyone know of England who only knows England? I mean, do you agree? I mean, what have you learned about the United States? When you add it up, I think that, and you look at your age right now, about 1/3 of your life has been lived abroad. Is that a fair statement? I mean, what have you learned about America from being abroad, from America? And has that been valuable?
Well, I don't know if 1/3 of my life has been abroad, but certainly several years of my life has been abroad. And no, in fact, that line you quoted from a poem by Rudyard Kipling called The English Flag was, to be precise, what can he know of England who only England knows?
Okay.
And Rudyard Kipling, as you probably remember, had spent various years of his life in the British Empire in those days, and he knew that. And that's something that it hit me over my head when I was an undergraduate at college, I guess because I had grown up in Alabama and then seen the North, seen Connecticut. And so I knew, the most educational experience of my life was going far away from home. That taught me more than anything. And I've told my kids, if you want to go to college, you can, but you have to go far away. You cannot go to university near home. Because that's what was so important for me, was going away and seeing new things. And likewise, Rudyard Kipling, he was smarter than I was and was older than I was. I realized that. And so that's one reason I wanted to see the world, because I knew I would learn a great deal by seeing the world, especially, I mean, Ed, if you have to cross a border in the desert or in the jungle, you're going to learn a lot, whether you like it or not. If you survive, you're going to learn a lot about the world. So it was.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I don't think anyone can understand what it is that you did. I mean, I came a little bit after you had, before or after, precisely, but going to China, there were two different kinds of currencies. That China was not, forget about being open. Different cities were prohibited to be able for foreigners to enter different counties, different cities. So that is a gargantuan undertaking that you took, and as someone who was here around the same time as you were doing that trip. And I don't think anyone can fully appreciate that as to what it was to do that, at least with the China portion. Soviet Union was another thing as well. But let's talk, I guess, a little bit about the general outlook and current events. So it's been a 10-year bull market in the US, and it's still, I don't know, petering along or chugging along in some way, shape, or form. What do you see as the end game of this longest bull market in history? I mean, I know that there's going to be sort of a death throw here coming up pretty soon. When do you reckon that might be? I guess that's a big question.
Well, you insightfully point out that this bull market is the longest bull market in American history. It started in 2009. That doesn't mean it's not going to go on for 30 years. I have no idea. It never has. So we're certainly, historically, we're coming to the end of this particular bull market. There are other signs, telltale signs, like lots of new investors, coming in and they're saying, oh my, they call up their friends and say, I've discovered this new thing called the stock market. It's so much fun and you can make money and it's so easy. It's so easy. These are always signs. So it happened at the end of a bull market, and there are other signs as well. Things got very expensive. So I would suspect that I know we're coming towards the end. Whether the end has already happened or will happen in the next year or two, I don't know, but I know it's going to end. And I know it's going to be very bad when it happens. I'm speaking of the world, not just the US, but especially the US. You know, in 2008, Ed, we had a big bear market, economic collapse because of too much debt. Well, since then, Ed, the debt everywhere has skyrocketed. Even in China, even China has debt now. And so the next bear market has to be a very serious happening because the debt is so very, very, very high. And I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just telling you facts. And the facts are we've always had bear markets. And especially when there's gigantic debt, they've always been bad. Well, that's going to happen again, whether we like it or not. And I suspect, since it has been so long since the last one, and since there are telltale signs again, be worried, be very worried. Even China has debt now, Ed. China bailed us out the last time. China can't bail us out again. Nobody, maybe North Korea can bail us out. I doubt it.
Well, what the largest debt holder of the United States, I think, is Japan, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not totally current. The second one is China. So some of these countries are that's that's the difference, is that they're interconnected, and so that that's creating problems on a world level, I would imagine. Would that be your take?
Well, the U.S. is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, Ed. I mean, I don't like saying this since I'm an American, but America, no country in the history of the world has ever been as deeply in debt as the U.S. is, and it's getting worse every day, every week, getting worse and worse and worse. And that has, historically anyway, that leads to countries having big problems when they get it deep in debt, but it also means that the economy, if the largest country in the world has problems, everybody has problems. So it doesn't matter who you are. When the next problems come, everybody's going to be in trouble, including China. China didn't have any debt 20 years ago. Nobody would lend money to communist China. Now even China has debt.
Yeah, how do you think they're going to deal with that? Because they had debt at one point in time. I don't know if you remember this, but all the big Chinese banks were underwater. They actually bundled all those bad debts into asset management companies, and then those were sold off to the West. How do you reckon that they might deal with the debt that they've got right now? Any clue?
Well, Beijing has said we'll let people go bankrupt. So far, they seem to be doing that. In Washington, if you get in trouble, they come and bail you out. London, etc. Which is here the Chinese communists are better capitalists than the capitalists in the U.S. or in Europe. The Chinese have said, we will, if you make mistakes, we will not bail you out. Now, who knows? They haven't had to go through something like this since 1949. But so who knows what will happen? But so far, they seem to be doing that, which will be good for China, be good for the world. Bailing out failure is not a good policy, if you ask me. And the Chinese seem to understand that. And it will, recessions and depressions, whatever happens, are usually good for the system because they clean out the dead wood. They clean out the underbrush. Forest fires are terrible, but they clean out the dead wood, they clean out the underbrush, and then the forest can grow better and faster and more healthier. That's what recessions have done for the world for hundreds of years. And if it happens again, and if that is what happens, it won't be fun. It'll be horrible, but in the end, it will clean out the system and we can start over again.
Yep. Is there any particular topic that you're researching right now at the moment? Anything that you're doing a deep dive into in particular?
Well, I am trying to find places that will, even no matter how bad things are, there's always somebody doing well. A famous economist once called it green shoots. There are always new green shoots growing no matter where we are. So I am looking for the new green shoots. I'm looking, certainly agriculture. Agriculture has been a disaster for a long time. The Chinese have a word, wei ji, which means disaster and opportunity are the same thing. We don't have that word in English. By the way, the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Chinese all have the same character. They pronounce it differently, obviously, but it's the same concept, that disaster and opportunity, the same thing. Now, obviously, the Asians have been around longer than we have, so they know. So I am looking for wei ji, disaster. Agriculture has been bad. I suspect there are going to be great opportunities there. But Ed, to answer your question, I am looking for what's the new green shoot. If you know, Ed, please don't announce it on the show. Send me an email, because I'm looking for it, and I want to find it.
Yeah, no, I definitely will be happy to do that, because I see some green shoots around, and I know you famously told the story about the people who are trying to find refuge, and historically speaking, there's one fellow who decided from Paris to go to Guadalcanal. He thought that was going to be the safe place, and that didn't work out so well for him. But where would you say is a safe place if things go all sideways in the world? What do you reckon? I don't want to be a doomsday kind of guy, but have you looked into that?
Well, you mean if there's war? Well, if there's war, I live in Singapore. I don't think Singapore is going to be a good place to be. The port of Singapore is the most important port in the world, especially if there's an Asian war. I don't know. The Andes, move to Medellin, which is a big city in Colombia or something. But the problem with that is, of course, is that just like the guy in the Second World War, he figured it out. He wanted to escape the war, so he went to Guadalcanal, which turned out to be the site of the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. So who knows? He was a genius, but it ruined him to be such a smart guy. I don't know where to go. Certainly, Medellin on paper is a good place. It's a wonderful city high in the Andes. People don't like wars in the mountains usually, but I don't know. If you're talking about refuge not from more than war, then obviously, or less than war, then obviously agriculture is a place to be. And if you look at the disasters caused by the epidemic and the coming recession, tourism, travel, transportation, things like that have been whacked. And if wei ji is correct, and it usually is, then that sort of area, travel, tourism, transportation, those areas are places where there'll probably be good opportunities. But I'm looking.
Yeah. What about, it figures like Elon Musk have raised concerns over the population, the risk of population collapse. Is that something you're concerned about? And how do you think that'll play out in the next 25 to 50 years? Does that make you less bullish on China? Because some of the numbers for China with the reduction, Japan, of course, has got those problems. South Korea has those problems. Is that playing into your thought processes on investments?
Well, we have as you point out, we have a laboratory we can look at. Japanese population has been declining since 2010. There are countries that are in worse shape than China and others. I don't know how it's going to wind up. I don't see it as a reason to give up on life or give up on investing, because even if it happens, these kinds of trends are very, very long term. There's 7 billion people in the world. And even if the world's population is going to decline by half, it's going to take many, many decades for that to happen. And some of the world will adapt and adjust to whatever that means. You can look at Japan to see how it works out, or other places. but I am not panicking about the population decline yet.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and you've focused a couple of your books on Japan as well. So I mean, it's that it's obviously something you've thought a great deal about.
Well, while just let me stop for a second. But while Japan does have declining population, there's still countries where they're having plenty of babies. Africa, the Middle East, even South America. There are places where they're having more and more babies, or not more and more, but enough babies to replace the population. So again, the world has always changed. The world has always had to adjust and adapt, and it will continue to do so.
Yep. And precious metals. So, I mean, obviously the big question, silver and gold, where are they headed now? And that's part of your portfolio, I would imagine, both of those. And are you keen on one over the other?
Well, I'm old enough, Ed, to know that when things collapse, people want to own gold and silver. They always have for hundreds of years. Silver more than, the original monetary system of the US was based on silver. I mean, it changed to gold later, but silver, the Middle East, silver's always been more important than gold. And Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver, as you may remember, not for gold. So silver's always been extremely important, but both, these are two places that I own, and I will buy more somewhere along the line. I hope I'm smart enough to, because if the world collapses, us old peasants know silver and gold. We want to own some silver and gold if the world collapses.
Yeah, have you, just out of curiosity, I mean, you talk about how agriculture, the average age of Americans in agriculture is 58 years old. The average Japanese is 66. Suicide rate is the highest rate among people in agriculture in the UK. And you reckon folks should take a look, young folks should take a look, see at agriculture. The same thing, I don't know if you know, but I mean, after August, 15th, 1971, when Mr. Nixon took us off the gold standard, really mining, United States has a lot of rare earths. The United States has gold and silver mines. They all stopped back in the 70s. I mean, have you ever looked into actually acquiring those? Those are patented plots. I mean, they still exist today. Actually, anybody can go on federal land and do mining, essentially. There's patented and non-patented claims. Have you ever looked at something like that? Actually, I know, kind of accumulating those types of things with those commodities with silver, because it seems like no one's involved in that right now. I just wondered if you ever gave it a thought.
Well, Ed, if you know a company that's going to find a big silver mine in Berlin, you should buy all the shares you can, I promise. And then you call me. I want to buy them too. I mean, yes, if you know a good mine, silver mine, gold, any kind of mine, in fact, you'll probably make a big, big, big fortune. But remember Mark Twain? Mark Twain was a famous American author, and he said publicly that a gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar standing at the top. Mr. Twain lost a lot of money in a gold mine, obviously. That's one of the reasons he had to become a lecturer at the end of his life, because he lost so much money in this fake gold mine. So, but if you can find the right one, oh my gosh, you'll make staggering amounts of money. I'm not smart enough, or I'm too lazy or whatever, to know who the great miners are now. So I mainly buy physical gold and silver or futures.
Right. No, I guess I was just talking about this idea that when, I've taken some Chinese out to see gold mines in the United States, silver mines in the United States. These are patented claims, and the folks that are involved in it still in the United States are, in their 70s or 80s and above. I mean, meaning that there hasn't been much activity in that. And it's just an interesting thing that we haven't, once we got off the gold standard, I mean, mining and education in mining in the United States kind of came to a standstill. This is my own sort of anecdotal experience. And so I just wondered if someone is ever going to take that up. But
well, let me repeat, because it is important. If you know the right miners or the right mine or the right company, by all means, you will make staggering amounts of money. But
Okay.
remember Mark Twain, and
Yeah.
what he said was, there are hundreds of mines out there in the world. Most of them will not be great successes. But if you know the ones that will, don't listen to me. Go buy all you can.
Okay. No, sounds good. And as to your portfolio allocation, do you believe in time like this, there's, what kind of agricultural, I know that you're big on that. Soft commodities have done exceedingly well, and obviously we're seeing, all this inflation, but sugar, rice, and wheat, that's all a part of your commodity, and that makes sense right now?
Well, as we've said before, agriculture has been a bad place to be for a long time, and that often leads to opportunities, as the Asians know, Wei Ji, to repeat myself.
Yeah.
And if you go back in history, you will see there have been many times when agriculture has been a nightmare. But there have also been times when the farmers have been the richest, most powerful people in any country in the world. At one time in Europe, 100 years ago, if an Argentinian was in Paris, all the Frenchmen would say, oh my God, look over there, that's an Argentinian. Because the Argentinians were so very, very, very rich because of agriculture 100 years ago. So there have been, and read Russian novels. Oh my gosh, some of those Russian counts, you couldn't believe how rich they were. But there have also been times like the last 30 years when farmers have not been great. So if you get it right, it's great to be a farmer. If you get it wrong, it's not so good. I'm not going to be, and if you really love it, you should buy a farm and become a farmer, that you'll get unbelievably rich. But I'm not going to do that because, first of all, I don't know anything about farming. Second of all, I don't particularly like farming. But if you do, oh my gosh, don't listen to me. Go become a farmer or marry one.
Right. Is the challenge though, Jim, farming and agribusiness has become huge. If you look at, for example, Smithfield Foods, that's owned by the Chinese. That's not farming. It's has to do with, meat products, of course, but that's the largest producer of meat products in the United States. Is it realistic for folks to get into farming now? If you listen to somebody like Victor David Hansen, his family has had a farm for 5 generations. He leases out his property to somebody else who has 12,000 acres. And so, I wonder how realistic, if you're not in super big agriculture, to be able to move in that direction. Does that make sense, or not? What do you recommend?
If you love it, of course it makes sense. Yeah, you're probably not going to start off buying 100,000 acres or something, but you can start small, and history is full of great success stories, whether it's in electronics or manufacturing or agriculture, whatever it is. I see great opportunities over the next few decades, years anyway, in agriculture, but only if you love it. If you don't love it, don't do it.
Yeah. And currencies, do you see that there's anything that will do particularly well over the next 5 to 10 years? What would be your guess?
I own a lot of U.S. dollars, Ed. U.S. is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. So you say, well, why do you own U.S. dollars? I own them because when turmoil comes, many people think the U.S. dollar is a safe haven. It's not, but people think it is. And that's why I own a lot of U.S. dollars. During the next year or two or whenever, the U.S. dollar is going to get overpriced, might turn into a bubble. I hope if it does, I'm smart enough to sell it. So your next question should be, well, where are you going to put your money? And I don't know yet. I am looking. I own silver and gold. I don't know whether I'll buy more silver and gold at that point or if I will find another currency. Conceivably, the Chinese renminbi should be the next world currency, but Chinese renminbi is a blocked currency. You can't buy and sell it like you can the euro or something. So I don't know yet where I will put my money if and when I sell my US dollars. But at the moment, I still see opportunities owning the US dollar because of people looking for a safe haven.
Right. I mean, it's like you were saying. I mean, it's almost what's the second best situation? I mean, what can replace it? The U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar, as I've seen, has been increasing in strength everywhere right now, right? In the short term here, at least, and which doesn't seem to make any sense considering all they're doing is printing up more money. But is that reminiscent, Jim, from when Nixon took us off the gold standard, in 1971 and made that announcement? The U.S. dollar went up as well. Isn't that correct, as I recall?
Yes, because people said the reason Nixon took us off the gold standard was because there'd been a lot of pressure on the U.S. dollar and gold. And so people said, the pressure is removed. And so the dollar went up. But the 1971 is a whole different world. And I mean, first of all, the U.S. was still a creditor nation back in those days. There was no China. Soviet Union still existed. The whole world was very, very different then than it is now. There was no Japan back in those days. The world's always changing, fortunately or unfortunately. So yes, there are some similarities, but for the most part, you have to figure out the future. As I say, I own U.S. dollars. I'm delighted they've been going up so much, but I do know that that's going to end eventually, and then I have to do something else. And I don't know yet what the something else is. If China becomes convertible soon, that may be the place to put money, but at the moment it's not a convertible currency. So it's absurd.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a fully convertible currency, but what if you've taken a look at like WeChat and WeChat Pay and the Chinese diaspora that are actually around the world and you go to different places and you're able to pay now. I agree. It's not a fully convertible currency, but it's kind of through the back door. Do you see it getting more prolific overseas, even though it shouldn't be, perhaps? I mean, because it is like you said, it's a not fully convertible currency. So maybe that's the bigger game plan. I don't know if you followed that much, or if you're on WeChat and WeChat Pay and all these kind of things that Tencent owns that. Are you bullish on that?
Well, the Chinese have been opening their economy and their currency for several years now, but it's still not all the way. Of course, it's a better, more convertible currency and more international assets in renminbi now than it were 20 years ago, but it's still not completely convertible. And throughout history, most people don't try to smuggle their money into a blocked currency. Most people are trying to get their money out of a blocked currency. So, I mean, if China makes it fully convertible, realistically, then I'm sure I will put more money into renminbi, and the world will. But right at the moment, it's still a blocked currency.
So let's just switch gears on the situation in the Ukraine. I mean, are you hopeful that there will be peace in the Ukraine, or this is going to get sorted out? Because these opportunities are having a ripple effect, right, on everything.
Well, of course, I'm hopeful. It's such a foolish war, but all wars have been foolish. Nearly all wars have been hopelessly foolish. Yes, I see the price of oil has been coming down. I see the price of grains have been coming down. So maybe there's going to be peace in the foreseeable future. It is a foolish war. I don't know what Russia's getting out of it. I don't know what Ukraine's getting out of it. So hopefully it will come. And if it does, there's going to be a huge rally in financial markets. Commodity markets will go down, but there'll be a huge rally in financial markets. That's probably going to be the last rally. I certainly hope there's peace for many reasons. I've already told you I'm very anti-war and have been most of my life.
No, well said, and we all hope for some sort of resolution there, and I mean, obviously what's happening this winter, you see, is causing problems in Europe, and I mean, are you taking long or short on any positions because of that? This anticipated price?
I cannot think of anything specifically that I have gone into because of the war. There may be something, but I mean, anything the war just adds to it. I mean, agriculture I owned anyway, and then it went up a lot because of the war. It's been reacting now, which is probably good news for the world. No, I cannot think of anything. I'm sure there's something, but I cannot think of it.
Okay, then.
By the way, I would like to be buying Russian stocks or Ukrainian stocks. I mean, I'm obviously not because I'm American, but no, I have learned in my life and reading that if you invest in a country during war, you're probably going to make a lot of money if you have the staying power.
Right. And I mean, what do you see that there's any on the horizon with regards to China? Are there any major crises you can see that are coming up, or that are challenges, I should say? I have crisis,
Well,
like you said, is that word Wei-Ji, which is that danger and opportunity. So what is the danger and opportunity you see might be coming up for China, if anything?
well, I mean, I hope for goodness sakes there's no war in China, or including China. There's no war anywhere, but if there's war with China, it means it's the US and the whole world is going to collapse. Financial markets everywhere will collapse. I guess if you own defense stocks, you might make money for a while, depending on who wins that war. No, I don't. I am not investing because of coming war involving China. No, I do own some Chinese shares, which I've owned for a long, long time. I own some renminbi, which I've owned forever. I own some U.S. stocks, not many, but some. No, I don't see anything that I am investing in because of coming war involving Asia.
Right. I mean, yeah, I don't think anyone can figure out what's going on with the United States government as Americans living overseas. I mean, we you know, it's a tight situation as to where we wind up. You know, Chinese dominated ETFs are losing money. At what point in time will the Chinese government's action towards tightening their economy and cleaning up their internal debt start hurting the global economy, do you reckon?
Well, there's been a bubble in Chinese real estate for several years. The Chinese government has been talking about it, trying to talk it down for a long time. Now it's finally popping, which is good for China. Beijing knows it's good. As I say, they've been trying to pop the bubble for a long time. All property bubbles come to an end eventually, wherever they are, and this one is now ending in China. In the end, it'll be good for China. Not good for anybody who's suffering or who's going bankrupt, but in the end, all bubbles are bad and all bubbles end. And this one is now, it looks like it's ending, whether it's being engineered by Beijing or by the market, I don't know, and it doesn't matter, but it is ending. And that's going to lead to certainly some changes in China, the Chinese economy and the Chinese system. It's going to make a lot of people angry, but it's going to make other people happy. So I am not investing in China because of the bubble popping, but it's going to happen. It is happening. It's going to continue because Beijing and many governments have wanted the bubble to end, and it, like all bubbles, it is ending.
Yeah, I mean, do you see, Jim, you know, folks selling China short in general? I mean, one thing, like I said, is you know, your investment mindset is you know, is a lot like some very famous people. I mean, do you think that that's something that folks are leaning towards, or is it too early to tell?
Wait, for shorting China? Is that what you said?
Yeah. I mean, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, you know, because of the uncertainty and what's happening now in the run up, you know, well, with the pandemic, of course. I mean, which shut down, you know, cities and still continues to do so. And then, you know, with what's happening about going forward, you know, with the country, with leadership in the country. I mean, is there, do you still feel confident in China and the situation with China?
Well, history, there always, in any country, there are always some people doing well and some people doing badly. You know, in the 30s, we had a horrible depression, but there were Americans who came out of the 30s very rich and very successful. Most didn't, But so that will happen in China, just as it has always happened everywhere. I don't know who is going to come out of this next decade or two in China extremely successful. There will be some people. But to answer your question, no, I'm not selling anything in China, and I'm certainly not selling anything short in China, because, you know, if you sold America 100 years ago, you might have looked smart for a while, but in the end, you look pretty foolish 50 or 60 years later. And that's my view of China. If I'm going to sell something short, there are better places to look for me.
Yes, great. It's good to hear. And then on these countries that you're looking towards as developing places, I know you mentioned in the past Uzbekistan. I know prior to that was Kazakhstan. You're still good with that? Thinking that those
Well,
places.
yeah, as I said before, there are always some people doing well in any depression, and there are some people doing badly. You know, I think that in the next decade or two, Uzbekistan is going to emerge after decades of disaster as being a successful and vibrant country and a vibrant economy. You can ask me in 20 years.
Right. And, you know, I know that, I mean, you've said this before, in 1962, Myanmar was the richest country in Asia, and like many countries, they closed themselves off from the world and their economies steadily declined. I mean, what lessons have you learned from investing in, you know, or seeing people invest in Myanmar, and how those investments fared with regards to these other kind of developing countries, developing areas?
Well, for whatever reason, and actually the reason I always give it was impossible, I never really invested anything in Myanmar because of their own bureaucracy and their own red tape. So I guess it's probably a good time to invest in Myanmar, but it's not easy because of their own regulations and requirements. If you can find places having huge problems, such as war or depression or whatever, it's usually a good time to invest in those places. It's not always easy. I would like to invest in Russia or Ukraine right now. Well, that's not practical. I'd like to invest in Venezuela right now. It's not practical because I have learned that historically investing in disaster is good. Remember the Chinese word wei qi. But some of these countries, if you're an American, if you're a citizen of the land of the free, it's not always easy to invest in some of these places.
Good. And then let's just finish up a little bit with Singapore. I mean, what lessons and stuff have you learned from living in Singapore? I mean, you went from New York City, and it was a little bit different. You know, I mean, you had to divest yourself of a very large place that you had in Manhattan, I guess, and then come to Singapore, which is you know, a completely different environment from New York City. I mean, what have you found living and working from Singapore? You know, have you found it exciting or challenging, or what do you personally think?
Singapore has been one of, if not the most successful country in the last 40 or 50 years or so. It's extremely easy to live here. New York was exciting, but it's hard to live there. Singapore is extremely easy to live in. People used to say that Singapore was boring, and maybe it was once upon a time, but now I have found that just about anything you want in Singapore, including entertainment or food or restaurants or whatever, people, whatever. So I've been quite keen on Singapore. We've been happy here. My kids have gone to local schools, government schools, and they've both been very happy in the Singapore schools. They were always the only blue-eyed kids in the school, but it hasn't held them back at all. And no, we're happy living here. And unless something dramatic happens, we're going to stay here. And my kids, my second daughter, who's in school here, junior high school, loves it, doesn't want to leave, doesn't want to go to boarding school or anything. So we have no reason to leave.
Great. And I mean, that was a family decision to come out, and it wasn't met with a lot of pushback, because like I said, most people from our country, I mean, have a hard time picking up stakes, and they've got family and connections and roots and everything else. I mean, you've been a world traveler, so that's like old hat for you, but was it a more difficult decision for your wife to make that move? And
Well, my wife by then had not like me, but still had world travels, and she could see what was happening in China. She could see what was happening in Asia, so she was for it. She approved and endorsed it. My daughter was 4, so she didn't really know, or she didn't have a vote. But no, she has been very happy. They both have been very happy in Singapore. Would they have been happier in the U.S.? I have no idea. But they've both been happy here, as has my wife and as have I.
yeah, there's some other wealthy Americans out there. I mean, there's a fella who helped found Singapore. I'm sorry, Facebook, and then Robert Friedland, who has been in mining, is famously, with Ivanhoe Mines and everything. Are there many Americans in Singapore now? I mean, I think that they moved after you moved there. So, I mean, maybe you set a trend.
I don't know about that, but yes, I do know that there are Americans here. But again, there's not many. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I periodically ask, and I've always been surprised at how few Americans live here. It's a country of 5.5 million people, but there are Americans. There is an American club. There is an American school, but it's not like, they're not gigantic numbers. As I said, my daughters are the only blue-eyed kids but we go to local school. We go to local Singapore school, which most foreigners do not. But no, so far so good.
Great. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I mean, is there anything that I haven't asked or that you would reckon I should ask? I'm
sure there are millions of things you haven't asked, and I don't have the answers either. But no, it's been, for me, interesting, fun, exciting, and terrific. And I hope we can do it again sometime. When you think of more questions, we can do it again sometime.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate your time. And I've been watching you, and I remember when they announced that you were moving to Singapore and coming to Asia, and I thought it's a tremendous decision, at least for someone who had done that years before, and you really look at the world a different way. So it's been an interesting, very enlightening discussion with you. So I thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.
Well, in that light, if you'd asked me once upon a time when I was in Demopolis, Alabama, and my phone number was 5, if I would ever be living in Asia, much less Singapore, I would have said, who is this guy? He's crazy. He was crazy. And here I am, very happy and very pleased. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, it's your great attitude, Jim. One thing I got to say is you look at the world, the glass is half full, not half empty. I mean, I've seen a lot of your speaking. I would say, that there are probably 3 big investors that are well known. It would be Mr. Buffett, Warren Buffett, of course, and yourself and George Soros. I mean, but I think a lot of Chinese know who you are. So you got a pretty big following or fan base from the Chinese population for sure in a positive way. So thank you, and it's been a very enlightening discussion. You have a good day now.
Ed, there are a lot of people smarter and richer than I am. So thank you, thank you, thank you.